there's a lot of skepticism about I'm a data owner. I have private information that I want to protect. It is my financial responsibility, my legal responsibility to protect this information and make sure that it remains private or remains proprietary. And so the concept of allowing anyone to be able to query against that information, to potentially learn things from it, but in a way to where it can't necessarily be tracked back to that specific information, or at least do something that would be revealing of the contents of that data. That is something that, even with all the mathematical proofs in the world, it doesn't necessarily translate to results all the time.
The major adoption barrier of AI is access to data. The conflict between the need for large data sets for learning and the increased concerns regarding data privacy can only be solved with better technology. And increased awareness about the opportunities and unprecedented problem-solving potential that data has for our society.
And this is where OpenMined hits. The open source community was founded by Andrew Trask and Patrick Cason, who is today's interview guest. Patrick has founded several startups in various industries and is a very strong advocate for private AI.
Patrick is the engineering lead of OpenMined, an open source community founded in 2017 with the goal to make the world more privacy preserving by lowering the barrier to entry for private AI technologies.
Join our talk with Patrick to learn more about why we should finally take control of our private data, about OpenMined, and how they are solving privacy and thus the future of AI.
Let's get into this.
Welcome guys to this week's UTX episodes or podcast interview. I'm Ani.
And I'm Valentin. Hello.
And all right. So today we have the privilege of interviewing Patrick Cason from OpenMined. Today we're going to talk about federated learning, making data accessible for everyone and everything, and to creating a better world using machine learning. So Patrick, thanks a lot for joining us today and taking your time.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
So Patrick, when we look at OpenMined and the mission behind it, how did it all start and why is this so exciting? Why does everyone need to care about OpenMined?
That's a really good question. I struggle to even explain OpenMined to my own parents this day. I still can't quite explain. I feel like we're trying to do so many things. OpenMined got started almost 4 years ago. It's early 2021 at this point. Got started almost 4 years ago. A longtime friend of mine from university and such, Andrew Trask, messaged me and a couple other people, and we got together and kind of chatted about ideas, drew on some whiteboards, and drank a little bit too much wine. And then the next day we had a Slack community. And it's grown from there. And we now at this point have, I think, almost 12,000 people in Slack. We are an open source software development community that is focused on developing tools for privacy preserving machine learning or AI or data science in general, as well as educating people on those projects and also doing a couple of global impact projects as well. So that's a little bit about OpenMined. I in particular lead the engineering team at OpenMined, and I've been doing so the last couple of months. I've been leading various teams related to federated learning or web and mobile development, and now leading engineering full time.
So we've seen that OpenMined has also developed courses around privacy and is really trying to do or give public recognition to the idea that private data can enhance machine learning, can enhance AI, can enhance the way that we use computers and information. Is this also core to your mission to bring this to the public, to make this widely adopted thing?
It is, yeah. So OpenMined has 3 core goals. We call these our programs at OpenMined. The first is build. We build privacy preserving technologies and tools, whether that's through fields like cryptography, differential privacy, federated learning, whatever it is. We educate people on how to use these tools, as well as how they apply to them, whether that's speaking directly to data scientists and software developers, or speaking to mom and dad at home on the advantages of privacy and kind of what that means. Also justifying the difference between privacy and secrecy, and how, you know, there's a certain benefit to remaining private online in the things that you do, not because you necessarily are ashamed of, embarrassed, or you need to hide your behavior necessarily. You don't want secrecy, you want privacy. And I think people can get those quite confused. So educating is a big goal of ours. And the last one would be impact. So these will be kind of global scale impact projects that we'll be beginning on in the next couple of months, to where we're trying to use private AI or private data science to apply it to some of the world's biggest problems.
And to dive a little bit deeper into the technology part, because you're also providing tools, you're providing, for instance, software or programming packages to other developers to build their applications on top, to build their private AI and private machine learning applications on top.
Sure.
How does it work? What are you building on top on? What is sort of the, so to speak, the core stream of knowledge that is used in your way to bring this to the developers?
Sure. So it's a variety of tools. We don't have a set prescription about how we feel that private data science should be done. This is an incredibly new field. But it's essentially what happens is a data scientist will have typical tools that they're already used to using, like PyTorch or TensorFlow. These are just code libraries that data scientists use to train AI models or run inference against them to get some sort of result from them. All we do is we write software that extends those tools that data scientists already know. So we write extensions for PyTorch and TensorFlow and Scikit and other related machine learning libraries that will extend them in a way to allow you to work with remote information, remote data, in other words. So instead, what this translates to is, rather than needing to have the data that you're training against or that you're querying against locally on your computer, meaning you own the information, or at least you have direct copied access to it, right? You've copied it or downloaded it to your machine in some way. Instead, this allows you to actually work with private information, private data. So you have the ability to connect with a owner of information in another place who may hold private information, whether that's an owner like, you know, our social media data as individuals, right? Or whether that's something larger of X corporation has a data set on their financial activities and it's private information, and maybe it could be interesting to learn from, right? So anything, or even in a hospital context of a hospital has some obviously very sensitive information like patient records and such that cannot be shared for very clear and obvious legal reasons. But you can use our tools using the libraries that you already know as a data scientist, and essentially apply them against private data in a way that allows that data to remain private and remain secure and remain in location, but you still get the benefit of performing data science against information that otherwise you never would have had access to. Really, that is kind of one of the biggest problems at that OpenMined is looking to solve. Is the world has had its big data revolution. The world has access to public information. But that private information is still locked either behind some sort of proprietary means, right? It's sensitive to a company or an organization, and therefore it must be private, or it's sensitive to detailed information about someone's life, right? In the case of healthcare information or financial information, something of that nature. Or it's information from a government that it may have on its citizens that could be particularly endangering in some sort of foreign policy context, right? There's a number of reasons why information should remain private. We're not trying to say that all information should be public, but we are trying to say that wouldn't it be great if we had the ability to design machines to be able to learn from information, to be able to design artificial intelligences to learn from information that previously was just inaccessible to the majority of people on the planet, but doing so in a way that really benefits everyone. It benefits everyone and allows that data to remain private. That's essentially one of the big problems that OpenMind's trying to solve is what could we possibly do with the world of information that is private, but also respected as private, and still learned from nonetheless. So
from your argumentation, it's obvious to us that OpenMind should be widely adopted, that big companies and governments alike, they should be using these sorts of technologies, and they should be not as reluctant anymore to provide their data on a remote system in an encrypted fashion to someone having a model to learn on top of this data. What is the issues that you encounter when maybe you talk to these kind of actors, or when you try to make the data holders, the big organizations that are holding that data, to sort of open up and collaborate with you? What are they bringing against OpenMind, and how can we overcome this, or how can OpenMind as a movement overcome these issues in the years to come?
There's a lot of skepticism about I'm a data owner. I have private information that I want to protect. It is my financial responsibility, my legal responsibility to protect this information and make sure that it remains private or remains proprietary. And so the concept of allowing anyone to be able to query against that information, to potentially learn things from it, but in a way to where it can't necessarily be tracked back to that specific information, or at least do something that would be revealing of the contents of that data. That is something that, even with all the mathematical proofs in the world, it doesn't necessarily translate to results all the time. And so it's taken quite a long time for organizations, whether they be in business, government, or otherwise, to come around to the idea of opening up this information. The thing that actually seems to be motivating quite a lot of them, rather unsurprisingly, is money. The fact that as a business, I can have private information is essentially just, it's something that's considered intellectual property, right? To talk about it from a business perspective real quick, it's considered intellectual property, and therefore it's not something that I necessarily have to monetize. It's more a certain power that I hold as a business, right? I hold this kind of this key. This is value to a business, right? It's intellectual property. But the fact that you can actually monetize that, it makes all the difference in the world to the owner of a business. You mean I've got private information that I'm sitting on, I'm doing nothing with, except using it internally for my own needs. You're telling me I can allow other people to have, not access to, but to be able to ask questions of this information in a way that doesn't actually leak data about that, the data that I own, and I'm able to earn money from it. Like that kind of blows people's minds. So there's a little bit of a shift once they realize that as private data owners, they actually have the ability to earn quite a lot of money from doing this. You actually see a lot of hospitals, for instance, that have obviously a wealth of private information that is highly personal to individuals like all of us. And occasionally they will do data brokerage deals with, of course, trusted and highly vetted parties. This could be researchers from major universities or such like that have a very specific target and a very specific goal. I'm trying to train an AI model to better detect breast cancer from scans of some sort, right? Or whatever the task would be. They would essentially work with the hospital, pay them likely an inordinate sum of money, and then have access to some of that information, but they would also have direct access. They actually have the patient records. They have a copy of it. And this type of stuff is done occasionally. If you're doing medical research, this is just kind of how it goes. But imagine if you could just ask a hospital, hey, Mayo Clinic, hey, Vanderbilt Hospital, hey, X Hospital, Mount Sinai, whatever, give me all your data sets that you have on diabetes. And it would actually return a list of data sets or patients who have diabetes that would be appropriately de-identified. I wouldn't be able to identify them. And then I can employ a whole use of technologies related to cryptography or differential privacy to essentially have the trust of the hospital data administrator that I'm not going to actually steal that information. I'm not capable of doing it. I'm still here to learn from that information. I'm still here to train a model or get some sort of result from asking that data set a particular question, but I'm not going to do so in any sort of way that's actually going to leak information that, of course, is highly sensitive and should remain treated as such. That's what OpenMind's trying to solve. But we find a lot of hesitancy from all sorts of industry. But when you mention that you can actually be paid to monetize these private data sets, heads start to turn a little bit. And we've seen that in recent years. There's been a whole bunch of startups related to areas like this. And we happen to be one of the larger organizations doing this open source and free and publicly available.
So you mentioned differential privacy. Could you walk us through that a bit? So what does it exactly entail?
Sure, I'll do my best. I'm not an expert, but the premise of differential privacy is that you have the ability to apply noise to either data itself or some result of data, right? And that noise essentially serves as a way to obfuscate you from learning any directly impactful information about that data, essentially being able to leak information, right? So if I'm training an AI model, let's just say to detect breast cancer, right? A data owner, meaning someone at the hospital, would want to apply differential privacy and basically add noise either to their data before I train, right? And so I'm training on noisy data or slightly noisy data, or they would be able to apply differential privacy after the fact to the resulting model that I'm trying to train before I can request it back, right? So I would train my model, they would apply noise as they go, and then I request it back at the end and I receive a noisy model. But both work, but essentially differential privacy is just the way of mathematically adding noise to either data or to either a data set or the result of asking data a question, so to speak, and ensuring some sort of privacy. There's been a lot of recent research into what are called privacy budgets or individual privacy budgeting, which is where an individual, like a data scientist, would have a certain budget of privacy. This is actually measured in the mathematical value of epsilon, so to speak. That's kind of the unit of privacy, so to speak. You have a certain allotted epsilon, and essentially every operation that you run against data, depending on the data that you're running against and depending on the operation that you're running, will deduct from your budget. And essentially you have a certain budget that you can spend, or else your result will become sufficiently noisy and unable to use, right? So you have kind of budgets that you have to play within, but it, depending on how much of it you use, your result will be more or less noisy, more or less accurate, in other words. So it's just one of the various means that you can employ to protect data, as well as protect the results of anything that's trained against data.
When we look at the different interconnections between, okay, I'm sending a model to a remote machine and I'm learning on data that I do not have direct access to. I have encrypted computation going on. And then afterwards, for the model results, I have an obfuscation of the data behind it. Do you think this is all technologically sorted out, like from how we know it, or do you sometimes have entities that say, okay, there's some issue with this specific step? Do you think there's some progress still needed, or do you think the encryption side, the privacy side, the mathematics behind all of this is kind of sorted out and it's just about making people understand it actually works?
The majority of it is that mental gap. It's the emotional gap of convincing people that this is safe to use. The math is, and I would not claim to be a mathematician in any sense, but the math is basically there in premise. There are security holes, but when used appropriately, if you use a variety of techniques at the same time, then you will be able to sufficiently protect information beyond a reasonable doubt. There are a variety of different mechanisms by which data can be protected. Obviously, the most protective model is that the best way to protect data is to own it, right? To actually allow individuals, actual people like ourselves, to actually own our own information and have the autonomy and the control over how that information is used. One needs to look no further than recent technological scandals to understand how big of a problem this is with people's information being sold, often against their will or against their knowledge, just by merely checking a checkbox on a website. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that. But there are a variety of means by which one can protect information, and we don't have any prescriptive opinions about, you know, you need to use differential privacy and federated learning, and those are the two buzzwords, go with them. You know, there's a whole host of different techniques that are appropriate on the given context, and there's not a one solution fits all to privacy. We provide a number of different libraries and tools that people can use to protect themselves. But ultimately, this is partly a matter of education, educating people on how to use these tools and these pieces of software to protect themselves and to protect their information that is sensitive to them, whether that's differential privacy, federated learning, homomorphic encryption, secure multi-party computation, self-sovereign identity and verifiable credentials. I mean, you know, whatever, zero knowledge proofing, whatever, they're all there. Or even deploying all of those in combination to a secure enclave, right? Whatever buzzwords you want to throw out, there is essentially some way to figure out a solution in privacy. It's just a matter of convincing people that it is sufficiently safe when combined appropriately.
So you mentioned the kind of organizations being a bit timid or a bit well, not as free or open, and you mentioned also that people are especially because of scandals in past years, are a bit afraid to share data, mainly because they don't understand it. So are you guys also working on kind of offering any solution to the general public, or to empower everyday people to kind of own their data and sell their data in a way that companies can use them, as you mentioned, by being able to ask questions without being able to properly identify and decrypt the information?
Really good question. Yes, in the long run, we are. Right now, we are focused on building tools and libraries, just because, quite frankly, we have to be our own customers a little bit in order to understand how to apply this to the general market. I actually think that there's been a couple steps that are. There's been a lot of efforts towards things like data wallets or data pods. There's been a ton of these different solutions out there for empowering everyday people to own their own information. And I think that theoretically, that's on the right path. Those projects are certainly onto something. The problem is, I think it's just a bit premature for the cultural understanding that is not only something that I should do, but something that I want to do as a consumer of the internet, of the world of information, the world of data. And I think that there's actually a bigger cultural problem that a lot of those projects don't necessarily realize. We do at some point want to get into the realm of data wallets and personal data ownership, and that is absolutely mission critical to OpenMind's longer vision. But if we can't, what's the phrase? Eat your own dog food, so to speak. If you can't, dog food your own product for a little bit and really know what exactly you're building and how it impacts industry and how it could be used in industry, then you can't really apply it to the general masses yet. Just the fact that, I mean, one needs to look no further than their Netflix queue for a slew of documentaries explaining this sort of problem of you should own your information. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's been tons of these highlighting on whatever latest scandal is related to data leakages or whatnot. I think The Social Dilemma is probably the most famous recent documentary on the topic. And they're all hitting the problem right on the head. The fact of the matter is that, at least so far from what I've seen, my mom and my dad have no desire to get off of Facebook or any of the social platforms that they use. not that it's Facebook, but like, I mean, you know, they're not going to stop using Google, you know.
Exactly.
I'd have to even teach them that there is another way to search the internet other than Google. So like these problems are not easy to solve, and there's not it's not like there's one enemy to this. Or even really enemies at all. It's more about the fact that people need to become conscious over the fact that personal data ownership is something that they should not only do because they should do it, but they should also want to do it. There are incentives around allowing people to own their information. I don't think people are properly understanding what they're signing up for. If they worked in the tech industry, they would understand what they're signing up for when they check that box and sign up for a website, or use a social login to sign into something. They would understand what they're getting into. But the fact of the matter is that they don't. We have AI models in the world today that are so accurate that they can identify a person out of something like 500 million different photos. They can identify one unique individual. That's incredible. I mean, think about how powerful that is, you know? And on the one hand, in the right hands, that's an incredibly powerful and useful technology, ideally for good. But when in the wrong hands, or in hands that initially are right, but may prove themselves to be wrong, or may prove themselves to be, you know, motivated by things that are not the things you're motivated by, that can be used against you. And I suppose that people are just not totally aware, despite how many documentaries have come out, how many books have come out explaining this to people. There's still kind of that cultural lack of understanding over why this is important. And we're approaching this from a technological perspective first, before approaching it from a general market perspective second. We just believe that that's the way it has to be. So
yeah, absolutely.
No.
I think the kind of general notion that your data is an entity of itself that is of importance and that can be monetized is at most 15 years old.
yeah,
I think especially with these kind of scandals in past years. But I think in that sense, the mission of kind of bringing this, to quote Steve Jobs, not just in the right hands, but in everyone's hands, right? To make everyone aware of the importance of data, is really important. Yeah.
People outside of this ask me all the time. They're like, why is this a problem? Like really, why should I care? That it's such a hard, first of all, you can't make somebody care about something they're not going to initially care about, right? They have to feel it. So, you know, you can't force the problem on them. But the reality is that we generate so much information as individuals in this day and age, that if we are not asking more questions about what is being done with that information that we are unknowingly generating for someone else or for something else, we're not asking those sorts of questions. I think it's just really naive to think about what that data will eventually be used for. I'm not saying it always has to be something nefarious. It doesn't, right? There's tons of companies that exist that have plethora of data on individuals, and for the most part, they do good things. They provide a good quality product to people that people are happy to use. And there's that consent there, right? You check the checkbox. So, well, you agreed. But I think we're going down a bit of a slippery slope. I think it's a little naive if we say that this isn't a problem, just because it isn't right now, you know?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, so definitely there is the need for us managing our own data, being the owners of our own data. And
sure.
Where do you see the first major application of sort of private AI or private data science in an industry or a field? You mentioned, for instance, working on diabetes data from hospitals. What can really represent a breakthrough in showing people also, okay, look, there's an industry where this is being successfully applied, and coming more sort of from the technology side of it. Okay, look, guys, this is just a better way to do it, and we've proven it, and it sort of emanates from that side of it. Where do you see which industry or which major applications do you see there?
There's two that strike me as particularly interesting. I would say the most obvious first choice for this would be healthcare. I think the second one would probably be in financial technology, particularly in analyzing information, particularly private information like financial records, for instances of fraud or instances of money laundering or such like that. There's been tons of efforts, both governmental and private industry, to solve these sorts of problems in a financial realm, and they've uncovered billions of dollars of losses or billions of dollars of fraud over time. We know these systems work. It's just a matter of whether or not we could work with them in a private context, right? Could outside researchers actually have access to this information in a way that's respectful to the privacy of the information? Going back to healthcare, which I think to me is probably the bigger one and the more important one. We actually have the ability, fintech is obviously important. We're saving billions of dollars of lost capital from the economy. That's not trivial. But in the healthcare realm, the stakes could not be higher. Mm-hmm. We're in the middle of a pandemic, right? And even at the point in which we hopefully get out of this pandemic, there will always be healthcare problems that still need to be solved. The reality is that a lot of that research, a lot of that work in healthcare happens in very small segmented silos of the industry, right? I'm a researcher at a hospital, and therefore I have access to the data of that hospital, right? Or of the hospital network, maybe, right? Or I am a researcher at a university. I would like to ask a question about patients with heart disease to see if there's any correlation between that and blood pressure, right? To be able to ask these questions of information, it's not hard to ask them. This really is not rocket science. It's data science. It's not rocket science though. It's honestly the fact that this information is held behind bureaucracy, a wall of bureaucracy. I actually don't think that that's a bad thing. I don't hold a pessimistic outlook on that. I think that hospitals are obviously well-intentioned. They're trying to protect the individual rights of their patients. And of course, that information is also to some degree, their intellectual property. So it's an incredibly valuable asset for a hospital. I can understand why they would be very hesitant to give that information away, quote, give that information away. They're not actually doing that, but from their perspective, give that information away. To me, the biggest applications of this are, you look at some of the models that have been trained for AI related to healthcare, whether they be detecting various forms of cancer, whether they be analyzing a large patient pool for developing vaccines or whatever this is, right? Or even uncovering things about the human body that we just simply don't understand, mapping the brain, something related to this, right? These sorts of problems are, to some degree, they've been proven that they're solvable at individual hospitals, or if you're a researcher, whatever hospitals you can get in touch with. Some of the largest AI models, let's just say for cancer, involve a couple million images and a dozen or so hospitals from a dozen countries at most, right? Those are some of the largest, and that may seem quite large. You say, my goodness, 1 million images. Yeah. That is nothing if you're training an AI model. You need a lot more information than that. And so the reality is that if you really want to train a model well, if you really want to train it to be accurate and not, 60, 70% accurate at detecting breast cancer or something, you need more information. Not only that, there's a whole problem with diversity of information that's been made light, especially in recent years, as kind of some scandals within data science. Information is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male, and it always has been. And the reason why that's the case is just because those are the typical types of people who have had the privilege to work on internet products and software. And so as that moves to be a more diverse world, we would hope that the AI models that we train are more diverse, but if the data that we're using to train them is primarily based on those sorts of stereotypical examples, we can only expect our models to be biased. Look no further than facial detection algorithms and how they perform with Black or African American individuals versus white and Caucasian individuals. It's a stark difference in accuracy, right? And it's not like there was some evil racist software developer or data scientist that came around and developed this really racist model. It was not deliberate. It was not intentional. It's just a result of a system of how data has been input into the world. If you apply this in a healthcare context, what this means is that if you're developing a model to detect breast cancer, for instance, if you train this only on people within the United States, if you're lucky to get a diverse enough data set from multiple hospitals spread geographically throughout the United States, it'll probably be pretty good at detecting breast cancer on people in the United States, right? I mean, but you try to apply that in the Philippines or in Australia or in Brazil or in Portugal or in Mali, where the types of problems, both socioeconomic and environmental impacts that affect that population and therefore would influence their health and the outcomes in their health, you're not going to get the same result. You're not going to get the same level of accuracy. So when you talk about healthcare, if you want to be successful, rather than training a model for all the 192, 193 United Nations recognized countries on Earth, rather than doing that and optimizing for each individual nation state, couldn't we just develop one model that would be trained on all of the world's information, all the world's private healthcare data that's relevant? That would be so much more diverse of a model. It would be so much more accurate. It would be so much more fair in the types of results that it's returning. And quite frankly, that just simply isn't possible unless you have either A, the world's most brilliant and successful bureaucratic mind ever to grace the earth, and you're able to negotiate with thousands of hospitals around the world. Good luck, never going to happen. Or if you can basically make a privacy guarantee to these hospitals that they can maintain the integrity and the privacy of their information while also benefiting the training of this model, for instance, right? So these problems are genuinely globally scoped. They're not, we're used to operating in the realm of, I don't have enough information to train my model, or I don't have enough money to pay for information to train my model, right? Which kind of isolates, small data scientists and kind of emphasizes large companies that not only own data, but also have a lot of money. So this whole kind of rebalancing act, I think that'll be present when we open up the world of private data. And I think healthcare is probably the first place to start.
You sort of stated already, if we now look into the future, you sort of stated already the major problems and what you would wish to happen in the future for OpenMined and these technologies to become widely adopted. But sort of, if you could make a wish list, looking at the surrounding conditions, the major stakeholders, you said bureaucracy, talking about regulators, talking about politicians, talking about media, what would be the main items on your wish list to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, or maybe, if possible, even faster, so that adoption of OpenMined would happen much faster? And, yeah.
How long do you have? Man, God, another great question. I won't order them. I think that'd be hard to do off the cuff. But I will say some of my wish list items for the next 5 to 10 years for private AI and federated learning would be, number one, to have a global movement of people understanding the reasons why they need to own their information and actually starting to do so. I think this is a chicken and the egg problem, though, and it'd be incredibly naive to just say, hey, everybody, go download your Facebook data and your Google data and your Amazon data and your Apple data and put it all in one place. And all right, great, we did it. Like ultimately there's the other side of that equation where you need to have organizations play ball by that. You need to allow, you need to have tools that allow websites, mobile applications, businesses, governments, the ability to interact with personal data ownership, right? It is that chicken and the egg problem of not only do people not own their information, and it's a really technically difficult problem to try and explain, and there's this whole thing of why should I care? I've got nothing to hide, you know, confusing privacy and secrecy and so on. But then there's the other problem of it, which is that businesses are directly not incentivized in allowing people to own their own information. There's no incentive there, other than maybe, you know, you have to spend less cost per month on database charges because you just aren't holding as much information. But maybe that'll level out someday. I don't know. Storage is so cheap, but essentially, I would love to see businesses get on board with allowing people to own their own information from the start in some sort of a data wallet or data pod, and then allowing them to essentially lease out that information into a broader ecosystem of other apps that may be able to glean insight from that information, right? So allowing your smart pillow that you sleep on at night, or you know, your bed motion detector or whatever that tells you how well you slept the previous night, allowing that to connect to your social media account, or allowing that to connect to your smart home, maybe to turn the temperature up to wake you up if you had a bad night's, you know, or maybe make the temperature warmer to allow you to sleep longer, you know, or, you know, something like that to allow you to get better sleep and catch up on the sleep you lost. You know, or whatever it is, right? But allowing personal data ownership to actually take off, and allowing businesses to actually have the ability to build their businesses around a kind of privacy as a first-class citizen, rather than privacy as an afterthought of, or this, you know, oh crap, I've had a data breach and now I've got thousands of records out in the open of my customers. Oh God, what have I done? Now I should care about privacy. Let me call OpenMined. It's too late, you know, like I want privacy to become a first-class citizen of the internet. And I think that starts with businesses reshaping the way in which they build the internet and the services that they deploy on the internet to allow for personal data ownership, which will then incentivize people to actually do so. That's the first thing. Second thing, I think would be exactly as you mentioned, legislative. The reason why this is not enforced and why things like GDPR just don't go far enough is simply because legislators are not briefed on the fact that there's no technological reason anymore why an organization would need to own your personal information, right? Previously, it was done out of the justification of, oh, I'm providing a user experience to my users that they couldn't otherwise get if I didn't hold information, right? And that was kind of the justification, like, oh, well, sounds good to me, you know, right? But like now we've got a world where it's not a requirement anymore. It's or at least it's quickly not becoming a requirement for some organization or some government or whatever, some central authority to hold information on you as an individual. It's just not a requirement for them to be able to deliver their product or service anymore. And if that no longer becomes a requirement, I kind of think it's up to legislators to be a bit more stringent and say, look, there's no benefit to you owning all this information other than it's intellectual property that you've kind of accrued by your users unknowingly and unwittingly just handing it over to you, right? Do you really deserve this? Does this really deserve to become part of your value as an organization? I think this is something fundamentally wrong with that. And if legislators don't know that this world is possible, you're not really going to change the mind of businesses. So it's almost like that chicken and the egg and the road. Which one came first? It's like you've got so many different things that have to happen in succession until eventually it will snowball. I think the thing that will change all of that though is helping businesses understand that they can protect their information and monetize it at the same time.
But don't you think that if you now democratize this kind of encrypted data and just tell the businesses that, say, I'm Mark Zuckerberg and I can now use even more data than I already have about people without infringing on their rights, shouldn't that be incentive enough for any business to use more data? Shouldn't that be kind of like, well, duh, I'm signing up for that. Why would I not get more free data, or not free, but
it's kind of the traditional starting problem of data ends up being siloed by 5 to 10 major companies around the world, right? And they essentially between them host an inordinate majority of the information in the world. So essentially, if you've got a couple large organizations holding all of that information, it doesn't really allow for much competition, does it? I mean, I even kind of wonder if there's a legal angle at some point of not allowing the little guy to have an equal opportunity to gain an edge on the market and actually release a competing product without actually end up being swallowed whole and kind of acquired early and then destroyed by one of these companies that inevitably will do that to protect their own IP and their own self-interest. So I think there's an incentive for new businesses and new apps to have a privacy-centered approach. Not to mention the fact that it's just a guarantee that you'll avoid any PR nightmares in the future. That's kind of a benefit. If I were starting a social media app today, that would be something I would want to strongly consider, given the precipice of how people speak about these sorts of problems today. But there's not really incentive for larger organizations to do this as much unless they find that there's another profitable motivation for them. So the advantage for the little guy is I get to have access to data that I never would have otherwise had access to, right? I may be a social media company, but I have access to my users' sleep data because they gave it to me because they agreed to do so, That's the benefit for the little guy. The benefit for the big guy is I'm able to monetize this entire treasure trove of information that I've somewhat unfairly collected over the last couple decades. So, yeah.
So let's say you could look sufficiently far into the future and you would be able to imagine a utopia, as we do in every episode of our podcast, sort of the world where this is perfected, where OpenMined and the whole idea of owning our own data and the whole idea that we can use private data for learning, for technology, that this is all part of, it's sort of common sense. It's like, as if today you know that you need to log into a business, tomorrow you know that you own your data and you can use your data to make money for you, and the whole economy is fueled by data. How would that future, that utopia in I don't know how many years, hopefully sooner than we think, how would that look in your mind?
What would kind of like a perfect data ownership utopia look like to me?
Sort of, yeah. Well, how would the world in general look like to you when this is sorted?
I think that corporations are just the easiest target to pick on. It's unfair. Corporations make the world go round. They provide the services and the products that we use every day, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But they end up kind of being the bad guy, because they have this profit motivation to own information. I would like to see that change in particular. I don't mean to pick on corporations, but I would love to see this desire to be power hungry over data just cease and allow people to become educated on how to hold their own information and on the power that they actually hold in doing so. The empowerment of being able to choose what to do with your information. I mean, you choose what to do with your body, right? That's your choice as an individual. Why wouldn't it be your choice out of all of the content, out of all the material, out of all the things that you create? Why should someone else own that? It just perplexes me why people think that's remotely okay. But there's an education problem there. There's clearly an educational gap, and there's also an educational gap on, okay, cool, great, I admit that's a problem, but I also have nothing to hide, so I don't really care. There's this moral gap too. We've got so many bridges that we have to cross before we can get to the utopia. But I would say that at the end of the tunnel, it would look something like personal data ownership for all individuals, the ability to lease that information out at the full control of that individual, to any other services that they would desire, and the ability to revoke access to that information at any moment that they desire. The ability for governments to run off of this personal information as well, even to the point of being able to determine sentiment of its population and actually propose legislation that is directly relevant to what a populace wants, right? If you think about it, if you're a government and you have the ability to read this treasure trove of data that your citizens are ready to lease over to you, as long as you pay them, right? Or give them tax credits or something of that nature, or whatever incentive they need. You could effectively propose legislation that would actually be to the perfect will of the people. That sounds like a perfect democracy to me. I can't imagine a more effective, more efficient democracy than that. A government which actually proposes legislation exactly how its citizens want, or at least the majority of their citizens want. I think a world in which, again, as I mentioned, corporations are just not so hungry to own information or feel like they need to own information, but are still empowered and feel a sense of competition to be able to drive forward and create amazing, innovative products and solutions that they already create, but just doing so with a little bit of respect for average people, you know, and not just only looking out for bottom line. It's government, it's people, it's business, it's everything in between. And then I think the last component I would say is we're a long way ethically on what AI means for us, for humanity. I think that personal data ownership is the great, it's kind of the perfect democratic equalizer, right? It allows people to actually have a modicum of power more than they had yesterday by being able to own their information and truly control their destiny as individuals and the information that they give to the world, that they, the service, the information that they provide to the world. I just think that's so precious. But ethically speaking, there's a lot of problems that are remain to be solved. I only think that private data is going to help issues in ethics like bias in AI. I think a lot of those will be resolved by just information becoming more readily available, particularly private information. I think data ownership will help contribute to that in the sense that it will create a culture of people who are well informed about why it's important to own information. But we're a long way there.
Awesome, but I hope it will happen, and definitely if it does happen, you will make history as the pioneers and as major driver of this to happen.
We hope to. We'll see.
Ani, do you have any other question?
Not really. Well, I have a lot more, but I think that would be
part two. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Would love to.
Yeah, I mean, especially like if we combine this with AI, because we have noticed that pretty much across all the technologies that we've covered, data is a very essential part in all of them, because as you mentioned, it is a very intimate thing, and it is really weird to understand how we got to today, where a part of our identity is owned by someone else and we have no say in that issue. But especially how that then how that plays into AI, and I think these two topics will really, or have the impact to really change the world as we know it. Especially like with health, for instance, we've seen that we can no longer talk about national health or even international health. It's really global health. So I think if we take those steps forward in data and AI, as we should, to kind of get the best course, we also have to ask more fundamental questions about society, people, and how our race is supposed to work.
Yeah.
So
couldn't have said it better myself.
Well,
we got to talk about federated learning at some point too. We got to come back and actually talk about that. I'd love to. So
I mean,
we didn't touch that.
We would love to invite you back on. I mean,
cool.
It was a real blast.
All right, I'll talk to you guys soon. Appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Thanks a lot, Patrick.